AHIMSA, A Brief Guide to Jainism, written by Andrea D.M. Lane, narrated by John Feather. Prologue. The 2-minute warning. Much of the violence that we as humans inflict on others happens in less than 2 minutes, whether it is rage against a driver who abruptly turns into our freeway lane, or anger from a surfer who takes off a wave we believed was ours alone. Michael Tobias, in his book Life Force, writes at length about the ancient Jain practice of ahimsa, or nonviolence, and how becoming acutely aware of the suffering of others can be mitigated if we just stopped and deeply thought about how much unnecessary pain and suffering we cause to a variety of life forms surrounding us. As Tobias explains, quote, "To temper that killer in man and the subsequent killing fields is to grope with those few moments where conflict begins. 2 minutes of unthinking, unfeeling behavior, whether in the eating of a hamburger, the casting of a fishing line, or, more subtly, the habit of taking one's children to a circus to view animals who in fact have been reduced to insanity and pain. 2 minutes of our own insanity in the breeding of captive animals who were meant to be free, or worse, the abandoning of those pets to certain death, in the reining, or worse, the racing of horses, the killing of bugs in a frenzy of vindictiveness, as opposed to more patiently removing them without injury. The litany of transgressions cascades with numbing ubiquity, and it all comes down to the collaborations, mindful or not, with atrocity carried out by or on behalf of humans, and committed against other living creatures, whether around the dinner table, on the job, on the farm, the ranch, in the street, at the grocery store." Unquote. Jainism arose as a systematic response to human and animal violence by positing a radical alternative, the path of ahimsa, or nonviolence. Their argument is a simple but profound one. If we can lessen the pain and suffering of those around us, why not choose that option instead of needlessly perpetuating the never-ending cycle of violent retribution? Jainism raises a most pregnant question for all of us. How big is our circle of compassion? Can we extend its circumference beyond ourselves and kin to include other human beings not of our tribe, and even further to include animals and other living beings? In those brief moments where we almost instinctively lash out at others, can we instead pause and change our responses? The Jains believe that we can, and have demonstrated over hundreds of years, how it can be ecologically and ethically successful. It is a very telling fact indeed that Jainism is the only major world religion that has never engaged in war. This book is a brief introduction to the Jain religion, including a close look at its inception and how it evolved over time to its present-day status. Special attention will be given to how Jain ideals such as ahimsa and anek-antavada, the doctrine of non-one-sidedness, can serve as much needed and welcome panacea to the world's strife and misery. Although Jainism is perhaps the smallest of the world's religions, what it has to offer humankind is of inestimable value. Introduction. When I was watching the first installment of the Hunger Games movie series, I was horrified to imagine what it would be like to be a player in such a death match, where participants must kill or be killed. But then as I left the movie theater, I realized that this very Earth was actually Hunger Games on steroids. Just think, we have arrived on a planet where the only way to survive is that something living must be killed, whether it be a plant, a fish, or an animal. Each of us has to take a life out in order to maintain our own life. We live in an omnivorous universe where pain and suffering are the common lot of its inhabitants. The history of civilization is in many ways a record of how humans have responded to this Darwinian nightmare where nature is red in tooth and claw, to cite Darwin's famous citation of Tennyson. Religion can be viewed as our primitive attempt to make sense out of a particular space and time that appears to have no ultimate purpose save keeping one's skin intact long enough to sire progeny. So many moral codes and so many ethical guidelines have been given across cultures about how we should respond to our existential predicament. Most, however, have been parochial and tribal in developing their lifestyle strictures, such that they merely serve to benefit those in power who developed the rules in the first place. Rarely do we find a wider, more encompassing purview that looks beyond its own self-preservation. I would imagine that almost all of us Homo sapiens would be mortified if we had to eat other human beings in order to survive. The very idea is abhorrent. But what about the killing of other species? Do we extend our circle of empathy to them as well? Sam Harris, the well-known neuroscientist atheist turned author, in a recent podcast speculated about what future generations will see in our own time as monstrous, but which we ourselves turn a blind eye. Harris and his friend Paul Bloom, the distinguished psychologist from Yale University, both agreed that it would be the fact that a majority of humans persist in eating meat, despite what we know now about animal pain and suffering. We look back at slavery and cannot fathom how it could be condoned, and yet it persisted. The same holds true with how we have treated women and homosexuals in the past, only to wake up, mostly too late, to our misguided abuses. Is it indeed possible to develop a world view that encompasses not only all of humanity, not herded and protected by nation-state-only interests, but all of life? In other words, how big is our circle of compassion? If we compare the world's religions and their respective moral compasses, even though many contain the golden rule of do unto others as you would want others to do to you, they tend to focus almost entirely on how to treat other human beings. In contrast, Jainism extends that credo to all of life and stands out as, perhaps, the one religion that argues for an infinite circle of empathy. Often, when I lecture on the world's religions, some of my students snicker to what lengths Jain monks will go not to harm any creature. For example, one well-known Jain leader refused to be filmed since he felt that the severe lighting would cause harm to microscopic creatures. Other Jains have even built hospices for dying rodents and other neglected animals. But then I ask my students a very simple but ultimately revealing question. Who would you rather see down a dark alley in the middle of the night? A group of Christians from the Spanish Inquisition? Or radical Muslims from ISIS? Or 10 sky-clad Jain monks sweeping the street? The inevitable answer from my students, almost in unison, is that they would prefer the Jain monks to the others. This is an instructive point, and not merely a silly thought experiment. I think we can learn much about how we wish the world to be and how we wish to conduct our own lives by learning about Jainism and its evolution. The following is but a brief glimpse into this most ancient and non-violent way of living. Mahavira and early Jainism. There is some controversy over when and how Jainism was founded. Some scholars argue that it may be the oldest religion in India, dating back to the Harappan times, though this is disputed by other researchers who date Jainism back to the 6th century BCE. According to Jain tradition, there have been 24 Tirthankaras, known as all-knowing teachers, who have built a pathway from the cycle of suffering, samsara, to eternal realm of liberation, moksha. The last Tirthankara is the most famous and is regarded by some as the founder of the Jain religion. His name was Mahavira, meaning great hero, and he lived from 599 to 527 BCE, though Western scholars place his birth and death within the 5th century proper. There is much uncertainty surrounding his life and work, and it is difficult to know for certain which details are historically accurate and which are merely the result of hagiography accredited over time. His story, nevertheless, is a fascinating one and says much about his influence. According to Jain literature, Mahavira, known at birth as Vardhamana, was born in Kundagrama, a district in Bihar, India, and was like his near contemporary, the Buddha, brought up in great wealth in a Kshatriya family of King Siddhartha and Queen Trishala. Apparently his parents were devout followers of the 23rd Tirthankara, Parshanvatha, and this undoubtedly must have influenced the young Vardhamana's spiritual outlook. Interestingly, the young boy was surrounded by wealth and luxury. There is some debate about whether he was married or not. The major sects within Jainism, Svetambara and Digambara, have differing views on whether Mahavira married. The Digambaras argue that he refrained from marrying Yashoda, whereas the Svetamaras hold that he did indeed marry her and that they had one daughter named Priyadarshana. Both groups agree, however, that at the young age of 30, Mahavira decided to renounce his home and family and embarked on a strict path of asceticism. It should be acknowledged here that Mahavira's life trajectory is quite similar to that of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. In fact, they share so much in common that it gives one pause to reflect about why this is the case. Some scholars suggest that the stories intermingled because each shared or borrowed from a common source. Others suggest that it is merely coincidental and may be part and parcel of the zeitgeist of the time. A number of legendary myths surround Mahavira's renunciation, and it is nearly impossible to separate historical fact from legend. For instance, in the beautifully illustrated book Mahavira, Prince of Peace, Rancor Prime describes a series of amazing tales regarding Mahavira's birth, childhood, and subsequent enlightenment. They are strikingly beautiful in their detail, even though they are of doubtful origin. Nevertheless, they are instructive in documenting the severe trials Mahavira must have undergone in his spiritual quest. We learn from one such mythological rendition the following. Finally, in full view of the watchful crowd, he removed the remainder of his clothing until he stood before them clothed only by the air. A glow seemed to radiate from him as he stood before them quite at peace and unself-conscious, full of purposeful intent. As the sun touched the horizon, he grasped the locks of his hair and in 4 handfuls pulled it all out by the roots. Finally, he grasped his beard and mustache in a single bunch, and in one wrench pulled it out. All these bundles of hair were collected by those around and placed in the waters of the river. Standing exposed before everyone, he called out loudly, "I will look upon all creatures as equals. I will speak only the truth. I will possess nothing. I will take nothing from others. I will observe lifelong celibacy." Such was the momentous beginning of Mahavira's sojourn. A number of trials and tribulations confronted the young man. Most of them now have become well-repeated moral lessons for devout Jains. These include how Mahavira responded to an angry farmer who accused the ascetic of neglecting care of his 2 bullocks, to how he enlightened a venomous cobra, to how he overcame the taunts and temptations of evil spirits bent on betraying his vows. Throughout all of this, Mahavira remained steadfast in his asceticism, practicing severe austerities for 12 years. The Kalpa Sutra, 18, explains it thus. Henceforth, the venerable ascetic Mahavira was houseless, circumspect in his walking, circumspect in his speaking, circumspect in his begging, circumspect in his accepting anything, in the carrying of his outfit and drinking vessel, circumspect in evacuating excrements, urine, saliva, mucus, and uncleanliness of the body, circumspect in his thoughts, circumspect in his words, circumspect in his acts, guarding his thoughts, guarding his words, guarding his acts, guarding his senses, guarding his chastity, without wrath, without pride, without deceit, without greed, calm, tranquil, composed, liberated, free from temptations, without egoism, without property. He had cut off all earthly ties and was not stained by any worldliness. As water does not adhere to a copper vessel, or colorium to mother of pearl, no sins found no place in him. His course was unobstructed, like that of life. Like the firmament, he wanted no support. Like the wind, he knew no obstacles. His heart was pure like the water of rivers or tanks in autumn. Nothing could soil him like the leaf of a lotus. His senses were well protected like those of a tortoise. He was single and alone like the horn of a rhinoceros. He was free like a bird. He was always waking like the fabulous bird, Barundal. Valorous like an elephant, strong like a bull, difficult to attack like a lion, steady and firm like Mount Mandara, deep like the ocean, mild like the moon, refulgent like the sun, pure like excellent gold. Like the earth, he patiently bore everything. Like a well-kindled fire, he shone in his splendor. Mahavira achieved enlightenment, or Kevala supreme knowing, under a sala tree on the banks of the river Rajupalika, today Barakar, near a place called Trimbihika Grama. That Mahavira and Buddha both received their deep insights under a tree, for Siddhartha it was a banyan, is revealing and says much about their respective narratives. Mahavira is alleged to have explained his enlightenment as, "I am all-knowing and all-seeing, and possessed of an infinite knowledge, whether I am walking or standing still, whether I sleep or remain awake. The supreme knowledge and intuition are present with me constantly and continuously." After this remarkable awakening, Mahavira gave his first sermon at Vipulachala, where he discoursed not only to humans but to animals and other sentient beings, explaining the way of AHIMSA, or non-injury to all. As the Jain World website elucidates, in his philosophical discourses he showed that Shiva, i.e. life, and Ashiva, non-life, are the basic constituents of the universe, and that their mutual contact creates problems of life. In this connection, he propounded the 6 dravyas, i.e. 6 substances, and 7 tattvas, i.e. 7 principles on their basis explained the nature of all objects and their activities. In view of these fundamental things, he revealed the karma theory and pointed out the way of getting the Atman, i.e. the soul, freed from bondage of karma. Along with philosophical dispositions, Mahavira laid much emphasis on ethical aspects involving actual practices of behavior. He gave detailed expositions of Grihastha Dharma and Muni Dharma, i.e., rules of behavior to be observed by householders and by ascetics. In his ethical discussions, Mahavira invariably laid utmost stress on the observance of non-violence in actual life, and on the strict avoidance of violent practice like performance of animal sacrifices, eating flesh, killing animal for sport, and other purposes. Mahavira eventually gathered a significant following, and his influence spread quicker than one might at first suspect, given the limitation of communicative systems at the time. He taught that the jiva, or soul, was entrapped with a universe of karmic storms that bind its own illumination and liberation. The key is to realize the truth of our samsaric condition by meditation and right living. Mahavira didn't postulate a faith-based system, nor did he enjoin the worship of any supreme god or gods. Like Buddhism, Jainism is non-theistic. According to the Jain Federation of North America, Mahavira preached that right faith, Samyak Darshana, right knowledge, Samyak Gnana, and right conduct, Samyak Charitra, together is the real path to attain the liberation from karmic matter of oneself. 5 vows of Jainism. To achieve this aim, Mahavira and Jainism point to 5 fundamental vows that should guide the Jaiva's way of life. 1. Nonviolence, AHIMSA, not to cause harm to any living beings. 2. Truthfulness, Satya, to speak the harmless truth only. 3. Non-stealing, Asetya, not to take anything not properly given. 4. Chastity, Brahmacharya, not to indulge in sensual pleasure. 5. Non-possession, non-attachment, aparigraha, complete detachment from people, places, and material things. Coupled with these 5 admonitions are anekkantavada, the acceptance of multiple viewpoints or perspectives, and sayadavada, the view that all judgments or appraisements are temporary and conditional. Mahavira taught the way of Ahimsa for the next 30 years of his life, finally achieving his final liberation from this world at the age of 72. While Buddha is reported to have died because of poison mushrooms, Mahavira died of self-starvation, known in Jainism as Salekhanhanvatra, or Holy Death. Film script of Mahavira's life. In the fall of 2015, I made a short film about the life of Mahavira based on a beautiful and fully illustrated book by Rancor Prime and B.G. Sharma. It can be viewed on the Neural Vision YouTube channel. The following is a transcription of the narrative script. According to Jain tradition, there have been 24 Tirthankaras, known as all-knowing teachers, who have built a pathway from the cycle of suffering, samsara, to an eternal realm of liberation, moksha. The last Tirthankara is the most famous and is regarded by some as the founder of the Jain religion. His name was Mahavira, meaning great hero, and he lived from 599 to 527 BCE, though Western scholars place his birth and death within the 5th century proper. There is much uncertainty surrounding his life and work, and it is difficult to know for certain which details are historically accurate and which are merely result of hagiography accredited over time. His story, nevertheless, is a fascinating one and says much about his influence. Here are 30 interesting details on the life of Mahavira. According to Jain legend, Mahavira first occupied the womb of a pious Brahmin named Devanada. Because she had wondrous dreams, she and her husband knew that this was a special child. However, in a strange twist of fate orchestrated by the god Indra, Mahavira was switched over to another woman named Trisala, who was a queen of the Krishada caste. Interestingly, her original child, a baby girl, was switched over to Devananda. So sweet was this baby Mahavira in the womb that he didn't move so as not to cause injury or pain to his birth mother, but this caused some fear in her because he was so still. When Mahavira was born, the universe rejoiced, and he was honored by gods, goddess, and angelic beings. Indra strikes a divine bell, Sughosha, so all can worship this radiant child. Indra is so pleased by the appearance of Mahavira that he lifts the child upwards to heaven so he could righteously honored. While in heaven there is a festival where he is bathed and adorned. When Mahavira returns back to the earthly kingdom of his father, everyone rejoices because everyone experiences great wealth and fortune. Because of this, they name him Vardhamana. As a young boy, Mahavira plays a game of tag with his childhood companions when a large cobra tries to attack, but Mahavira flings the hissing snake away from the boys and away from harm. Another demon, disguised as a little boy, tried to deceive Mahavira while playing leapfrog. growing super tall in order to attack him, but Mahavira made him shrink down by his blows until the demon begged for mercy. This is how Vadharmana became known as the great hero Mahavira. When Mahavira was a young boy, 8 years old, studying at school, Indra took on the teacher's form to show everyone that Mahavira was a great rishi. Mahavira grows up a young, handsome man, but he refuses to participate in hunting since he believed that we should treat all others as we wished to be treated ourselves. Mahavira, honoring his parents' wishes, gets married to Yashoda and has one daughter named Priyadarshana. After his parents died, at 28 years old, Mahavira wants to renounce the world and seek enlightenment. To do such, he asks permission from his brother, Nandivardhanana, who delays him for 2 years. Mahavira explains to his family and kingdom that he must follow a higher destiny than merely storing worldly riches. As Mahavira gets ready to renounce his kingdom and prepare for renunciation, he opens up the palace doors and gives everything away. After his sacred bath, Mahavira is carried out on a beautiful carriage in a parade through the town. In front of the Asoka tree, Mahavira takes off all his jewels and pulls out all his hair in 5 fistfuls. Indra then appears and provides him with a beautiful white shawl to cover his naked body. Mahavira in his radiance is attractive to both males and females, as he gives off an enchanting aroma of sandalwood paste. In the beginning of Mahavira's journey, a poor Brahmin asks for a gift from him, and Mahavira offers him a part of his beautiful white cloth that was bestowed on him by Indra. But the other part ripped on a thorny branch, and this too was taken by the Brahmin. Mahavira now is completely naked. When Mahavira is asked to watch a farmer's bulls, Mahavira is deep in meditation and unaware of the request, only to be beaten by the disgruntled man. The cows return peacefully, and Indra appears to protect Mahavira, and the farmer repents. As he meditates in a temple, evil spirits try to torture him, but eventually realize their wrong ways and leave him undisturbed. Mahavira comes upon a cobra that bites his foot, but Mahavira reminded him of his past life, that he used to be an ascetic, and thus he liberates him from his bad karma. On a ferry crossing rough seas created by an evil spirit, while everyone panics, Mahavira remains calm. Other demons also try to assail him, including his wife from a previous life, who was envious of him. When Mahavira was on a 5-month fast, he had very strict restrictions about how he would break it, and a young woman met the conditions and offered him a basket of beans. Mahavira meets his severest test when a deranged farmer puts sharpened pampas grass and shoves into each ear hole. The next day a physician saw Mahavira in this miserable condition, and the pampas grass was removed. For 12.5 years Mahavira practiced severe austerities, and because of this practice he eradicated all of his past karmas, and a brilliant white aura surrounded him from then on. With complete knowledge, Mahavira became a Jina, one who has conquered the onslaught of samsara. In celebration of his Jina status, the gods planted an Asoka which grew in full size immediately, and this is where Mahavira taught the community his message of non-violence. 11 philosophers renowned for their erudition tried to challenge Mahavira, but were unsuccessful, and the leader of the group, Gautama, became one of his greatest disciples. After 24 years of teaching, Mahavira was confronted by an old disciple, Gausalaka, who had gained supernatural powers and who tried to use evil curses against him, but it backfired and he died instead. At 72 years old, Mahavira gave his last sermon for 2 days and 2 nights and reaffirmed the 5 principles of Jainism: non-violence, truth, non-theft, self-control, and detachment from worldly possessions. As Mahavira was on his deathbed, he reminded them that his spirit was immortal and there was no reason to be sad. He died in the year 527 BCE. Gautama cried at the death of his master, Mahavira, but remembered that he should be attached to the body of his beloved teacher, and immediately became enlightened himself and continued the teachings of Mahavira. The evolution of Jainism. After Mahavira's death, at the reputed age of 72, his teachings spread throughout India. Accordingly, his teachings were codified by his disciple Gautama Swami, also referred to as Gautama, and became regarded as the most holy of the Jain scriptures. The two main sects of Jainism, Digambara and Svetambara, have differing views on the evolution of Jain teachings. As the Jain Encyclopedia explains, most religions have sets of holy writings that lay out key principles and offer guidance and examples to believers, and Jainism is no exception. For the Svetambara sect, as for all Jains, the Jinas are the ultimate source of teaching. This is especially true of the 24th Jina, Mahavira. All Jains believe that this teaching was first transmitted orally. All sects also agree that this teaching was partly lost and partly changed over time. However, they disagree on which parts have vanished and which have been amended. This explains why the Svetambara and the Digambara consider different texts to be authoritative scripture. Svetambara Jains have their own history about the transmission of scriptures and their own body of scriptures. The Svetambara subsect disagree about what exactly these authoritative texts are. The number of accepted scriptures corresponds to a sectarian division which took shape from the 15th century onwards. Murti Pujaks consider there are 45 scriptures, while Satanaka Vaisins and Tarapanthans state there are 32. Within the scriptures, some groups of texts are unchanging, while others show fluidity and divergence. Decades after the death of Mahavira, a dispute arose over the teachings of Jainism, and this led to a schism between two schools of thought, known as the sky-clad and white-clad. Literally, the monks of the Digambaras are naked, while those of the Svetambaras wear white clothes. The Digambaras are much lesser in number, but arguably are closer to the original tenets of early Jainism, whereas the Svetambaras have the largest following and are more widespread throughout India and elsewhere. It is roughly estimated that there are anywhere between 4 to 7 million Jains worldwide. The differences between Digambara and Svetambara. Adapted from Jain World. Practice of nudity. Digambaras stress the practice of nudity for the monastic as an absolute prerequisite to the mendicant's path and to the attainment of liberation. But the Svetambaras assert that the practice of complete nudity is not essential to attain liberation. Liberation of women. Digambaras believe that a woman lacks the adamantine body and rigid will necessary to attain moksha, i.e. liberation. Hence she must be reborn as a man before such an attainment is possible. But the Svetambaras hold the contrary view and maintain that women are capable in present lifetime of the same spiritual accomplishments as men. Food for omniscient. According to the Digambaras, once a saint becomes a Kavali or Kavali Nani, that is, omniscient, he needs no morsel of food. But this view is not acceptable to the Svetambaras. Minor points of difference. Leaving aside the trivial differences in rituals, customs, and manners, the following are some of the minor points on which the two sects of Digambaras and Svetambaras do not agree. Embryo of Mahavira. The Svetambaras believe that Mahavira was born of a Kshatriya woman, Trisala, though conception took place in the womb of a Brahmin lady, Devananda. The change of embryo is believed to have been effected by god Indra on the 83rd day after conception. The Digambaras, however, dismissed the whole episode as unreliable and absurd. Marriage of Mahavira. The Svetambaras believe that Mahavira married Princess Yasoda at a fairly young age and had a daughter from her by the name of Priyadarsana, and that Mahavira led a full-fledged householder's life until he was 30, when he became an ascetic. But the Digambaras deny this assertion altogether. Tirthankara Malanatha. The Svetambaras consider Malanatha the 19th Tirthankara as a female by the name Mal, but the Digambaras state that Malinatha was a male. Idols of the Tirthankara. The Svetambara tradition depicts the idols of Tirthankars as wearing a loincloth, bedecked with jewels and with glass eyes inserted in the marble. But the Digambara tradition represents the idols of Tirthankars as nude, unadorned, and with downcast eyes in the contemplative mood. Canonical literature. The Svetambaras believe in the validity and sacredness of canonical literature, that is, the 12 Angas and Sutras as they exist now, while the Digambaras hold that the original and genuine texts were lost long ago. The Digambaras also refuse to accept the achievements of the First Council, which met under the leadership of Acharya Studal Bahadra, and consequently the recasting of the Angas. Food of ascetics. The Svetambara monks collect their food from different houses, while the Digambara monks take food standing and with the help of knotted upturned palms, and in one house only. Dress of ascetics. The Svetambara monks wear white clothes, but the Digambara monks are naked. Possessions of ascetics. The Svetambara ascetic is allowed to have 14 possessions, including loincloth, shoulder-cloth, etc. But the Digambara ascetic is allowed only 2 possessions, a peacock feather whisk broom, the pikhi, and a wooden water pot, a kamandalu. Jain teachings. Anekantavada. Anekantavada, literally not one-sided, is one of the most profound and insightful concepts ever developed in the history of ideas, and traces its origin back some 2,600 years ago to the ancient religion of Jainism in India. Anekantavada, though sometimes postulated as an intellectual extension of the Jain concept of AHIMSA, or nonviolence, is perhaps best understood as a process of seeing any person or event from multiple angles and not closing oneself off from contrarian perspectives. Some have even argued that Anekantavada is a philosophical talisman to ward off dogmatic thinking or myopic fundamentalism. A beautiful illustration of the concept is captured in Jain literature by the story of 6 blind men and an elephant. By accessing different parts of the elephant's body, each blind man tries to deduce what he is touching. The blind man who feels a leg says the elephant is like a pillar. The one who feels the tail says the elephant is like a rope. The one who feels the trunk says the elephant is like a tree branch. The one who feels the ear says the elephant is like a hand fan. The one who feels the belly says the elephant is like a wall, and the one who feels the tusk says the elephant is like a solid pipe. A king explains to them, "All of you are right. The reason every one of you is telling it differently is because each one of you touched the different part of the elephant, so actually the elephant has all the features you mentioned." Interestingly, Anekantavada is not a concept exclusive to Jainism, since it has appeared in various ways throughout human history. We find the idea sprinkled throughout literature, and it is the central theme in Tolstoy's famous short story, The Coffee House of Surat. Set in India, various individuals from different religions and cultural background debate the existence of God and his nature. There is a Persian, an African slave, a Brahmin, a Jew, an Italian, a Protestant minister, a Turk, and finally a whole host of others from differing faiths. As Tolstoy recounts, but by this time a great dispute had arisen among all the strangers of different faiths and creeds present. There were Abyssinian Christians, Lamas from Tibet, Ismailites, and fire-worshippers. They all argued about the nature of God and how he should be worshipped. Each of them asserted that in his country alone was the true God known and rightly worshipped. Everyone argued and shouted. Tolstoy resolves the story with a Chinaman who argues for an acceptance of a multiplicity of views, arguing that the God they seek transcends human pettiness and political nation-states. Concludes Tolstoy, "So spoke the Chinaman, the student of Confucius, and all who were present in the coffee-house were silent, and they disputed no more as to whose faith was the best." The implications of Anekantavada are also present in celebrated international films, such as the Japanese classic Rashomon. The plot involves the death of a samurai, and each character in the movie recounts a different version of what transpired, although each of their perspectives is tainted by being self-serving. There is the wife's story, the bandit's story, the samurai's story, and the woodcutter's story. Multiple perspectives, but none contain the full story or the whole truth. One of the best examples of Anekantavada is found in science, which is predicated upon the acceptance of multiple viewpoints with the desired aim of allowing each to compete with each other to discover which one best explains the given phenomenon. But even when one viewpoint holds sway, the scientist must continually be open to being wrong. This very modus operandi of allowing contrasting models is precisely why science has been so successful and why it has been incredibly progressive in developing new and powerful technologies. Edward O. Wilson underlines this spirit of multiple worldviews and its apparent unity in his controversial book, Consilience, the Unity of Knowledge, where he contends that each academic discipline should be considered and reconciled when examining complex issues. Ken Wilber postulates something similar to consilience, but discarding more of its radical reductionisms by championing an integral paradigm that incorporates an AQAL, all quadrants, all levels, inclusivity, which is sometimes explained more simply as everyone is right. What makes the Jain doctrine so powerful is not that it relativizes all religious claims, but rather that listening deeply to other perspectives is considered an important pathway for the discovering of more encompassing truth. Ironically, by allowing uncertainty as a core virtue, it allows for a more certain pathway to understand the world and its varied manifestations. AHIMSA. AHIMSA, translated as nonviolence, is perhaps the one concept that defines Jainism best and one that has had a tremendous impact on the history of ethics worldwide. From a purely Darwinian perspective, we live in a world that is predicated upon eating living things in order to survive, and as such resembles a massive killing game where pain and pleasure serve as elemental motivators. There are, to be sure, a variety of ways to respond to this horror show we call daily living. While the vast majority have engaged in the evolutionary proceedings, doing his or her best to be part of those who live long enough to pass on their genetic code, certain individuals and groups have chosen an alternative pathway, one which seems completely contrarian to nature's methods. Jains have chosen, en masse, to lessen killing and adopt a pathway of nonviolence whenever possible. This remarkable ethic is generally termed AHIMSA, literally, not to injure, and has a long history in India dating back to the Vedic period. However, it has reached its most refined expression in the Jain religion, which has elevated the principle and made it an essential part of its worldview and practice. What is perhaps most revealing in the Jain practice of Ahimsa is how far it extends to all living beings, even including insects and certain plant life. In the essay The Way of Nonviolence on the famous Jain leader Acharya Sushil Kumar, the author explains why humans have developed aggressive behavior. Wherever there is an other, fear arises. It is the emergence of the separate self, the I-ness, the egoic structure, which is at the heart of man's cruelty, Sushil Kumar stated. With the advent of self-awareness, there also comes the presumption of what is not self, and all of that, the environment, the world, them, generates fear. This fear drives human beings to protect the self from all that threatens its separate existence. But such a strategy can only end in failure and a lifelong narcissism, a denial of the universe and what it offers. Paradoxically, the more one tries to retain the self, the more one eventually loses it in the fight against the not-self, the world. A tragic double-bind indeed. What is the solution? There's only one. Sushil Kumar postulates, give up the false idea of an independent self and begin to see the creation as one indivisible whole. Unless the individual surrenders its infantile posture towards life, one which is reflected in the obsessive fear of death, then the end of wars, nuclear or conventional, will never be secured. As Sushil Kumar elaborated, it is easy to wage battle with others who have not seen the light or true path, but it is very difficult to conduct the real war, which must take place within ourselves. Sushil Kumar's whole message was based upon the principle of Ahimsa, non-injury and respect toward all living things. Indeed, it is the ideal which has served as the guiding light to his spiritual practice and political ideology, to show loving-kindness in all directions without recoil, to every creature, great or small, ugly or beautiful. This, Sushil Kumar stressed, was the ultimate message of Jainism. However, he emphasized that Ahimsa was not the property of any particular faith, but is the spiritual inheritance of all men and women. Throughout history, there have been various degrees of non-violence which has been practiced, ranging from simple non-injury to human beings alone to the extreme of not hurting insects or vegetation whenever possible. Jainism's uniqueness has been in its rigorous adherence to the doctrine of Ahimsa in all forms. Followers of Jainism are strict vegetarians abstaining from meat, fish, and eggs. They also do not drink alcohol or take mind-altering drugs. Though there is no God as such in Jainism, devotees do hold that the true reality of the universe is spiritual in nature. It is the goal of all devout Jains to extricate their souls from the realm of matter in order to achieve absolute freedom or liberation. To achieve this enlightened state, the disciple must work very hard on herself, circumventing the tendency of the mind to focus outward on the world and its pleasures, instead of allowing more karmas to accumulate, which only keeps the soul imprisoned. The devotee must give up evil tendencies and transcend the realm of prakriti, maya, or illusion. AHIMSA Basics, Refraining from Violence, adapted from BBC on Jainism. One should refrain from violence to any living creature. Violence includes physical violence, mental violence, verbal violence. Violence can be committed in several ways, all of which should be avoided. Committing it yourself, asking others to commit violence, encouraging others to commit violence, assenting to or condoning violence. Violence involves violent intentions as well as physical harm. This is controversial among Jains, and both the points below are disputed. Accidental physical harm may not count as violence if there was no violent intention, but lack of compassion or care may be a sufficiently violent intention. Ahimsa touches every area of life. So Jains are vegetarian, don't use cloth whose production hurts animals or humans, take care to preserve life in everything they do. Jains are also not allowed to do jobs that cause harm, for example, those involving furnaces or fires, those in which trees are cut, those involving fermentation, trading in meat products, honey or eggs, trading in silk, leather, etc., selling pesticides, selling weapons, digging, circus work involving animals, zoo work. Ahimsa is positive, so it's good to forgive, promote tolerance, be compassionate, give to charity, work for peace, protect the environment, work for kindness to animals, do one's daily work in a just and honest way. Jainism today and its impact. Perhaps the biggest and undoubtedly the most surprising influence Jainism has had on the world at large is how we eat. Today, vegetarianism has become a viable option for millions worldwide, and much of the reason behind this is due to Jainism and its high ideal of not eating animals. Of course, most Europeans and Americans are almost completely unaware of Jainism and its doctrine of ahimsa, but it has had a profound impact on the ever-growing vegetarian movement, coupled with Buddhism and Hinduism, which also advocates to some degrees abstaining from eating animals. Jain philosophy has touched many people who are interested in alternative lifestyles, even if they may be unaware of Indian ethical systems per se. Mohandas K. Gandhi, for example, though born a Hindu, was highly influenced by Jainism, and in turn he himself, by imbibing many Jain ideas, has influenced the world with his political views on truth-seeking and nonviolent protests. As the Somakon website explains, Mohandas K. Gandhi, whom many revere as the father of India, was not a Jain by birth. His parents were Vaishnava, and he was born into that Hindu sect of the city of Porbandar, Gujarat, on October 2nd, 1869. Jainism has a strong influence in Gujarat because many Jains live there. Growing up in that province with a pious mother, Gandhi was constantly exposed to the Jain doctrines. Although he was not Jain by letter, he was Jain in spirit because of his ideals and philosophy. Therefore, Gandhi was and was not a Jain. At the age of 18, Gandhi traveled to England to study law. Gandhi's mother was hesitant to let him leave because she had heard that young married men became corrupted when they went to England. She consulted Bekharji Swami, a Jain monk, who said that Gandhi should take a solemn vow in front of his mother and then he can be allowed to go. He administered the oath, and I, Gandhi, vowed not to touch wine, women, and meat. This done, my mother gave her permission. In England, Gandhi's adherence to the vow was tested many times. Once someone recommended that he eat eggs because eggs were not meat. After taking them for some time, he realized that in his mother's interpretation of the vow, meat included eggs, so he quit eating them. This taught the young Gandhi the importance of interpreting a vow in the spirit of the person who administers it, in this case his mother. One golden rule is to accept the interpretation honestly put on the pledge by the party administering it. Gandhi had the choice of following the spirit of the vow or interpreting it explicitly. Both courses of action can be taken for a pledge. It is necessary to follow the essence of the vow and not the letter to preserve fairness. Fairness and honesty prevent disputes and conflicts. Gandhi strove for the attitude of equality, and that is how he was a Jain in spirit. The central tenet of Jainism is AHIMSA, nonviolence, and Gandhi's philosophy rested upon it. He developed a method of political activism called satyagraha, which was wholly based upon truth and nonviolence. Sat, truth, agraha, firmness. It has been translated as non-cooperation and passive resistance. Gandhi said, "Satyagraha is essentially a weapon of the truthful. Satyagraha is pledged to nonviolence." He used this principle in the Kheda district when there was a crop failure. The officials wanted to collect taxes from the farmers even though they knew the crop was bad and the poor farmers couldn't pay the tax. After trying to petition the officials, the farmers and volunteer political activists signed a pledge saying that they would not pay the taxes because the crops had legitimately failed. They would also suffer any imprisonment or other legal action the government may impose on them. Instead of rioting and demonstrating, the farmers were for the most part civilized and nonviolent, so the government had no choice but to give in. The officials could not arrest everyone, of course. The victory demonstrated the power of truth and nonviolence, which Gandhi had instilled in the people. Like a Jain, Gandhi was also a vegetarian. In fact, he became a complete fruitarian and lived on a purely fruit diet. His diet consisted, among other things, of ground nuts, ripe and unripe bananas, lemon, olive oil, tomatoes, and grapes. He completely eschewed milk, cereals, pulses, and other things. This was how strongly he believed in AHIMSA. His entire autobiography was devoted to it. The exercise of writing my autobiography has given me ineffable mental peace because it has been my fond hope that it might bring faith in truth and AHIMSA to those who waver. Gandhi believed in the Jain doctrines, and without a doubt this helped him to achieve greatness. Gandhi's acceptance of Jain ideas over the course of time also influenced many others, including such notable political activists and thinkers around the world as Dr. Martin Luther King in the United States and Nelson Mandela in South Africa. Even the great Nobel Prize-winning physicist Albert Einstein spoke at length about his respect for Gandhi's influence, especially Gandhi's absolute adoption of the Jain ideal of AHIMSA. Today, the Jain religion has centers around the world and have created magnificent temples in India and elsewhere. They have also developed an extensive literature on how to practice Jain ideals, which has had a distinct influence on the growing environmental movement worldwide. Although the Jain religion is a very small one in comparison to Christianity and Islam, though it predates both by centuries, its overall influence is far greater than its numbers suggest. Clearly, the Jain concepts of Anekantavada and AHIMSA are two of the greatest ideas ever developed in human civilization, and one can only hope that they will continue to guide humankind to a brighter future. Appendix 1, Jain Worship. Excerpted from an article by Taylor Eccles. Temple Worship. Jain temple services involve worship and prayer and are led by a monk in front of a shrine to a particular Tirthankama. Sects like Terapanthist Jainism oppose the notion of worshipping in a temple, but there are many temples devoted to the two main sects, Svetambara Jainism and Digambara Jainism. Deities in Digambara temples are plain and undecorated, while the deities and interior of the Svetambara temple are ornate with glass paintings, gold, and jeweled decor. Temples around the world. Jainism is practiced throughout the world, with large complexes like the Jain Center of Greater Phoenix in the United States and the Jain Center of Leicester in UK, attracting local Jain populations for weekly worship and festivals. Lal Mandu is a Jain temple in Delhi, India, dating back to 1658 that is still used for worship. Pilgrimage. Pilgrimage is a key part of Jainism, and ancient holy temples in India attract Jains who wish to pray where past Tirthankaras achieved enlightenment known as moksha. Some sites have fallen into ruin, like the Panhakuda Basadi, built in 900 CE in the southwestern Indian state of Karnataka. Others, such as the Shatrunya in Gujarat, are vast temple cities teeming with worshippers. Shatrunya is one of the most famous pilgrimage locations for Jains, being the site where the first Jain Tirthankara achieved moksha. Home worship. Despite a rich history of worshiping in temples, Jains are not required by their faith to attend temple services. According to the BBC, you can practice Jainism at home by praying throughout the day and staying mindful of the teachings of Jainism. When worshiping at home, complete one 48-minute session of reflective meditation every day. Perform morning prayers before dawn and repent for your sins, including any unwitting harm you may have done to even the most microscopic of creatures throughout the night when you were sleeping. Appendix 2. Mahavira's Message. Excerpted from Harvard University website on Mahavira's message of Ahimsa and Moksha. Live and let live. Love all, serve all. Where there is love, there is life. Violence is suicide. All living beings long to live. No one wants to die. Have compassion toward all living beings. Hatred leads destruction. Silence and self-control is non-violence. Just not I dislike pain, so all other beings dislike pain. A wise person does not kill, nor cause others to kill, nor consent to the killings by others. Respect for all living beings is non-violence. Non-violence is the highest religion. All human beings are miserable because of their own ignorance, and they themselves can be happy by acquiring proper knowledge. The greatest mistake of a soul is non-recognition of its real self, and can only be corrected by recognizing itself. Every soul is in itself absolutely omniscient and blissful. The bliss does not come from outside. All souls are alike and potentially divine. None is superior or inferior. There is no separate existence of God. Everybody can attain godhood by making supreme efforts in the right direction. Know thyself. Recognize thyself. Be immersed by thyself, and you will attain godhood. God is neither the creator nor the destroyer of the universe. He is merely a silent observer and omniscient. One who, even after knowing the whole universe, can remain unaffected and unattached is God. Every soul is independent. None depends on another. Fight with yourself. Why fight with external forces? He who conquers himself through himself will obtain happiness. A man is seated on top of a tree in the midst of a burning forest. He sees all living beings perish, but he doesn't realize that the same fate is soon to overtake him also. that man is a fool. Appendix 3, Historical Timeline, adapted from the Jainpedia. 10th to 9th century BCE. Parsva, the 23rd Jina, lived between 950 and 850. 599 to 527. Svetambara, traditional dating of Mahavira, the 24th Jina. 582 to 510. Digambara, traditional dating of Mahavira, reformer of Jainism. 515. Mahavira's first disciple, Indrabhuti Gautama, reaches final emancipation 12 years after Mahavira. 530. Mahavira's last chief disciple, Ganadhara Sudharman, attains liberation 24 years after Mahavira. According to tradition, all Svetambara monastic orders trace their origin back to him. 4th to 3rd century. Probable beginning of discussions, perhaps centering on clothing and nudity, which progressively led to the hardening of boundaries. Dundas, 2002, 49. Between Svetambara and Digambara sects. 352 or 348. Svetambara, first recitation of scripture in Pataliputra under the supervision of Stahulabhadra, 160 years after the death of Mahavira. Death of Bhadrubahu, Svetambara, 175 years after Mahavira. Digambara, 162 years after Mahavira. 3rd to 2nd century. In Magadha, Emperor Asoka converts to Buddhism. Jains start migrating from eastern India, center of his power, to northwest Delhi and Mathura regions south and west, Saurashtra and Gujarat east coast, Kalinga, present-day Orissa and South India. 2nd century BCE to 3rd century CE. Mathura in present-day Uttar Pradesh emerges as a Jain center confirmed by inscriptions of mendicant lineages and images of Jinas wearing half garments. 2nd century CE. Digambara, the period when the main religious scriptures were written down. 4th century. Svetambara, collective recitation of scriptures took place at Mathura under the leadership of Skandilakarya Vallabhahi, under the leadership of Nagarjuna. 5th century. Svetambara, collective recitation of scriptures at Vallabhahi, led by Devardagahani, Sana Saramana. All the surviving scriptures were put in writing in 456 or 466 at Vallabhahi, forming the canonical scriptures, all written in Ardham Agadhi Prakrit. This marks the final split between the Svetambara and the Digambara sects. The Tattvartha Sutra, as written in Sanskrit by Umansvati, Umansvaman, and is the main Jain book of fundamental thought, recognized both by Svetambara and Digambara, traditional dating of the thinker Sudhasena Divakara, recognized by Svetambaras and Digambaras. 9th to 10th century. Digambara Jainism revives in Tamil Nadu, demonstrated by epigraphy, carved rocks, and temple complexes. Jains become prominent in Karnataka society under the Ganga dynasty. Jains erect the colossal statue of Bahubali at Shravana, Belgola in 981. 11th to 12th century. Svetambara Jains become prominent in Gujarat under the Chalukya royal dynasty, represented by King Jayasimha Siddharaja and King Arapala. Examples include Jain monastic presence at the royal court through the Jain monk Hemakandra, 1089 to 1172, expansion of religious architecture and Jain holy sites such as Mount Abu Mount Shatrunjaya and Taranga, new Svetambara monastic orders, Gakhas, arise such as Kaharatara Gakha and Tapagakha. Earliest available Jain manuscripts date back to this period, written on palm leaves. 13th to 14th century. Complicated relations between Jains and the Muslim powers in North India and Gujarat, despoliations and desecrations of Jain temples and images, or reconversions of sites. Jain merchants and notables have influence at the Muslim courts. Paper becomes the usual material for Jain manuscripts written in western and northern India, although palm leaf continues to be used in the south. 15th century. Digambara Jain communities play significant roles in Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh, especially Gwalior. The institution of the Bhattarakas flourishes. Lankhasa leads critical questioning of temple and image worship, eventually leading to the rise of the Lankagaha. 16th century. Svetambara, Murti Pujaka monks, Hiravijaya Suti, and Jinkandra Suti are prominent at the court of the Mughal Emperor Akbar and obtained privileges for the Jain communities. Digambara, several key figures such as Panarasides and Taran Swami favor meditation, mysticism, and mental religious practice over a ritualistic approach and question the institutions of the Bhattarakas. 17th century. First traces of the monastic order known as Stahanaka Vasin, founded by monks who broke away from the Lankagakha. Birth of the Digambara Terapanthin monastic order in North India, which rejects the institution of the Bhattakaras and certain temple rituals. 18th to 19th century. The Svetambara Tarapanthin monastic order is founded by Akarya Bhiksti after splitting from the Dhanakavasin order. British officers in India, such as Holbrook and Mackenzie and other Westerners, slowly discover the importance of Jains as a living faith and as one of the oldest Indian traditions. 19th century. Digambara monastic orders decline sharply. Jain mystic and reformer Srimad Rajakandra, 1867 to 1901, systematic search for manuscripts is undertaken in India, and large numbers of Jain manuscripts from Western India reach European libraries. Jainism is established as a tradition distinct both from Buddhism and Hinduism by the German scholar Hermann Jacobi in 1879. Jainism is first represented at World's Parliament of Religions in Chicago in 1893 by Verchand Raghav Gandhi. Jain merchant communities migrate to East and Southern Africa in search of new economic opportunities. 20th century. Digambara, the tradition of naked monks, slowly revives, but the institution of Bhattarakas declines. Svetambara. Monastic communities expand. Both Digambaras and Svetambaras establish organization for lay communities as well as Jain educational institutions. Terapanthin leader Akarya Tulsi founds the non-sectarian Anuvarat movement in 1949. In post-independence India, Jainism is recognized as a distinct faith but has no special constitutional status. 1970s to 1980s. Celebration of the 2500th anniversary of Mahavira's Nirvana in 1974. Restrictive racial policies in East Africa forced Jain communities to emigrate to UK and USA, where they organized themselves. Federations of Jain associations in North America, JAINA, established in 1981. Institute of Jainology, IOJ, established in London in 1983. Jain Declaration on Nature, 1990. 21st century. Celebration of the 26th birth century year of Mahavira in 2001 to 2002. Rising question of whether Jains should have the constitutional status of a religious minority in India. This decision given to the individual states in 2005. New Delhi city government grants constitutional status in 2008. Celebration of the Great Anointing Festival of Bahubali at Shravana Belgola in 2006. One of the leading Jain Svetambara mendicants, Muni Jambu Vijaya, dies on 12 November 2009. The 10th leader of the Terapantin monastic order, Acharya Mahaprajna, dies on 9 May 2010.